was a child, I watched the civil rights movement on television.
Those struggles that were in the 60s, they're still today.
If we unify, we would create a domino effect for peace.
We're not just here for the moment, we're here for a movement.
We cannot rest.
I'm about to do something of substance.
We cannot win racial justice in the dark.
I've been inside so long.
The Bronx is burning.
We had to save ourselves.
In LA, it was rough times. The police department was a gang. We're the only ones that can actually stop this war against us. When I think about it still, it makes me emotional.
There's been a toxic gas leak in Institute, West Virginia.
If it had been a white neighborhood, would they have done the same thing?
This was a Black community confronting the system.
We decided, oh, gee, we could do this.
Our fight for public school integration, it cost a lot.
What we're not going to do is retreat. We're going to fight all the way.
This is about respect. That day in the Million Man March, people see us. Million Men coming to Washington, D.C., I was 100% in.
Movements are about people and what they do to push us forward.
We must keep the faith and keep our eyes on the prize.
We're still working hard to save ourselves.
We can only stop fighting when all our people are free.
Good afternoon and welcome back to My Harlem Portrait, the show that aims at shedding the light on the fundamental contribution of African Americans to the building of this country and on Black excellence. Today, you will see that Black excellence is represented in the utmost way because we are going to talk about the HBO original 6-part documentary series, Eyes on the Prize, Free. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. 1977-2015, executive produced by Dawn Porter, the one who did also John Lewis' Good Trouble. It aired on February 25th, 26th, and 27 on HBO, and all 6 episodes are now available to stream on Max. I am absolutely honored to welcome today Miss Dawn Porter herself. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So you really don't need any presentation, but I'm sure that not everybody is aware of all you have done, because I missed myself quite a few things that you have done. So you are a former attorney who received incredible awards from your peers. You are the founder of Trilogy Films and an Emmy, Peabody, Critics' Choice Impact, Gracie, and Independent Spirit Awards winner filmmaker, 3-time Sundance Film Festival alum, and your films, which are very, very impactful, and the series that you do, they focus on social history, social justice, history, and cultural icons. Among them, Trapped, Gideon's Army, John Lewis, Good Trouble, winner of a 2021 NAACP Image Award, Bobby Kennedy for President, The Lady Bird Diaries, The Sing Sing Chronicles, Deadlocked, How America Shaped the Supreme Court, and most recently, The Intimate Luther, Never Too Much, on the life and legacy of a Grammy-winning legend, Luther Vandross. That premiered at Tribeca Festival last year and was recently released in theaters and premiered on CNN Max in January. All these are on platforms like HBO, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, CNN, PBS, and others. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Can you tell us what compelled you to transition from your illustrious legal career to filmmaking? And also, which were the most rewarding moments and the most rewarding moments, projects, and the most challenging?
Oh, I really enjoyed being a lawyer. I worked for a law firm for 5 years, and then I worked for ABC television in New York City. So it brought me to New York, back to New York. I'm from New York City. Um, and at some point, I realized I was really interested in documentary films. And I was seeing a lot of films about the Black experience, but not by a lot of Black directors. And I thought this is something that I was really interested in and pursued. And so worked with a lot of, I networked with a lot of my friends in television and in the law. And I made the first film, Gideon's Army, which is about 3 young public defenders working in the Deep South. And that was purchased by HBO and got an Independent Spirit nomination, and just really was very successful. And I just kept going. I mean, I think there are so many stories to tell about our community, but just stories to tell in general. And so I found it was really something that combined so many things that I was interested in: social justice, art, cinema. And so it's just been a very rewarding time. It's always hard to make these projects. They're emotionally challenging, they're intellectually challenging. And so, but I find that that's part of the fun of it, is figuring out how to meet those challenges. So every film is different, and every film has its things that are hard about it.
What were the moment where you said, yes, this is really great. I'm really doing what I wanted to do. I really reached what I wanted to do.
I think it was really when I was making Trapped, and so Trapped is about abortion providers in the Deep South, and the story about the decreasing access to reproductive health services, abortion, but also just medical services. The way that the story was being told did not really reflect the experience of so many women of color who were really the people, and poor people, who were being deprived services. So listening to those women and their heartbreaking choices, how some people had children who were wanted and they couldn't afford to care for them.
Wow.
Many people had other children. One woman we spoke to had just gotten off of public assistance. She had a 2-year-old, she's married, and she just gotten a job. And she said, if I have another baby, I'll have to go back on public assistance. It just wasn't the right time for her. And all of these stories show how personal and intimate this decision is. And of all the entities involved in the decision about when and where to have a child, the one entity that should not be involved is the government. And so I really felt like that film really did raise up some voices that were not being heard. And I think too that the chipping away at reproductive rights had been happening a long time. It had just been happening on poor people and on minorities. And when it reached the wider dominant culture, that's when people really started to pay attention, and then it was too late. And that's kind of the story now. We've had people kind of infringing on civil rights, treating people terribly. Now it's reached the dominant culture, and we're not in a good place.
And this is one thing that I see in all your films. I binge watched all the episodes, right? So there is a trend, and the trend is that history keeps on repeating itself in ways we get beautiful, fantastic successes, and we think, okay, we finally reached what we wanted, and then backslash immediately. And I learned so much for all these episodes that I watched. And this about abortion rights, and so on, it's so incredible that it's happening in this country. That I'm Italian, and in Italy, we had the abortion right very, very late. I mean, all other countries in Europe had legal abortion. We still didn't have it. But my friends in Italy, when they call me, they ask me, is it true what they're doing? They're going back. They're getting worse than we were. And that's crazy. It's crazy.
It is really shocking, and I think so many things that are happening now in this country are unbelievable, but we need to believe them. And you're so right about not, if we do not understand our history, it gets repeated. So when I made the film about John Lewis, John Lewis worked to get voting rights and civil rights in the 1960s. He continued that through his career, but he had to reintroduce the Voting Rights Act. And today, that act is not being complied with. So something that we thought, half a century ago was settled law, is now, not being enforced. And so if we, and that is why there's an assault on public education. And that is why Eyes on the Prize 3, which we have just completed and is available on HBO. You can see it, all the episodes. But that's why it's important to tell that history, because, and what Eyes does is Eyes on the Prize, the original series. So this is part 3 of Eyes on the Prize. So Eyes on the Prize 1 really focuses on the 60s, 70s. Then there's Eyes on the Prize 2. Our series focuses on the late 70s. We start with housing, people in the Bronx, and then we move through to the early 2000s. And what we're showing is that there have always been people, ordinary people, who just resisted oppressive behavior. And so that's why it's so important to show it's not just, there's no one savior coming to rectify injustice. It's all of us.
Exactly.
And I love, there's this group in episode 4, and this older African American woman, and she says, at some point we realized we could do this, and that was that film is about environmental justice, about polluting and cancer causing. They got a polluter shut down because there was such a high incidence of cancer in this. And I read today, the Trump administration is stopping the cleanup of sewage coming into Black neighborhoods. There was already, a plan to clean up the sewage. There's just such a mean-spirited approach to how people's lives are being impacted. Things that the government should do. The government should help the people of North Carolina clean up after a storm. That's why we have a government, to help our communities. The government should help a community that's being impacted by sewage flowing into their drinking water.
It
There's such
is
a meanness,
unbelievable.
like what's happening. It is very hard to understand.
I believe what I think it's, I don't know if I can say this. I think that the aim is to eliminate.
I mean, when you have people attacking science and health, cancer research, sickle cell research, childhood cancer and diabetes, and then you have people eliminating the Department of Education, so poor schools are not funded. I mean, it's not far-fetched to say there's a whole group of people we do not care about. When you couple that with deporting people, students, for speech, it is hard to understand what else the goal could be.
It can, and I mean, the stock exchange being cut down. There was reason for that.
Yeah.
Buying up everything. What is now? I mean, when people say, what the hell is he doing? No, he knows exactly what he's doing. And he told us exactly what he was going to do. So I don't know what we were expecting. I really don't understand. You know, I had a friend visiting from Uruguay a couple of weeks ago, and it was just the day before they fired Joy Reid. So that night, I didn't know she was going to be fired, of course. And we watched Joy Reid, and then we watched Rachel Maddow. Those are my idols. And my friend, at a certain point, she said, oh, this is really good comedy and parody. And I said, this is not a parody, Mercedes. She looked at me, she said, you are joking. And I said, no, that's why I wanted you to see it, because this is what is really happening now in this country.
I do think, you know, whoever does Eyes on the Prize 4 in 20 years is going to be looking back, and we're really going to have to do a lot of work to explain how we got to this place. And I'm very worried about so many people who are, we can't fix the people who are in clinical trials whose cancer treatments are going to be stopped. We can't help the children who aren't getting food support. You know, those things are going to just impact people. We can't make that right.
No, you can't go back. It is impossible to understand, and it's impossible to go back when you start going down this road of dismantling everything good that has been done and all the progress that have been accomplished. I mean, I'm afraid of traveling by plane in the States now.
I mean, it's not, you know, you laugh to keep from crying because there's, you know, planes crashing and the FAA being dismantled. I mean, government works for people without power and for people without money. And that's who really makes use of so many government services. But we all need a functioning government. You know, so it's, you know, it's unclear what our future is, and that's really destabilizing. You know, it's very hard to plan, and it's hard to encourage young people to get into politics or to public service when you have random people firing people who have been in public service, you know, who are helping Social Security and clean drinking water and all the things that we are proud of in this country. And they're like all at risk, and it is overwhelming, you know, but I do think it's important for us to call out what we see. At the minimum, we should identify it. And you know, that is what is going to help us stay sane. They can do all these things, but we don't have to pretend that it's okay.
Impossible. I wanted to ask you a few questions, ask you to talk about each of the episodes, because each of the episodes are very important. Because, as you said, you were inspired by the Harry Hampton's legendary 1987 documentaries, which was Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Movement. And when did you decide to take up this challenge of doing this six new episodes, not one, six you did. And they start, as you said, in 1970s, and they go up until 2015, into 2015. Tell us a little bit about each one of them. And one more thing I wanted to say before we go into that, because I don't want not to say this, that recently you were awarded the National Humanities Medal by former President Joe Biden, elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and received the IDA Career Achievement Awards. How does it feel?
It feels great. This is hard work, and I try my best. I work with a great team. But I think President Biden, that was being at the White House. He addressed all of the artists and all of the winners. And what he noted is, that we were going to face really hard times, and that storytelling was going to be really important in documenting this period of time. And so that was a real honor. For Eyes, we started working on this in 2021. So we've been working on it for a really long time. And one of the things we wanted to make sure is that we had a range of topics. We had 6 different teams working on all these films, extraordinary filmmakers.
Yes.
So the first thing we did is we watched the original Eyes all together, and we talked about what made it so powerful. And then we had so many stories to choose from. So we kind of, as a group, chose, we wanted to cover housing. So that's episode 1.
Yes.
That's how some people, the Bronx was being burned out. People were being displaced from their homes.
And this is something I didn't know. I knew that happened in Harlem because I live in Harlem. And so my friends are telling me that, fires were happening,
yeah,
and people were displaced and so on. But I didn't know that in the Bronx, it was also happening, and to that extreme.
The Bronx was really targeted in the 1970s. People were buying buildings and then just burning them down for insurance. And a group of tenants got together and decided to take over some of these abandoned buildings. And not only did they take them over, but they rehabbed them, and they brought them back to life. And it really kind of uplifted the community. It's a really incredible community story. Excuse me. And so Geeta Ganbir is a wonderful filmmaker. So sorry. She did this, found some of the original community activists, and they did this terrific story.
That was an incredible story. And I think this is the solution that we will find now, is that people will get together, students, young people, they will get together and they will make things happen, because that looked like something impossible.
Yeah.
And
that's right. And I think that that's true of a number of these stories. So episode 2 is about criminal legal system, the public defenders who were working kind of in Washington, D.C. And they were, there was a lot of violence. And so you have, and this is important to say, is that when crime is happening, it's often happening in low-income communities. So you have some of the older people in particular saying, please help us. But the police were really targeting children. So that was happening not only in Washington, D.C., but also in California. It's such a fascinating story about how the gangs in California came together themselves to have a truce. And that was, unfortunately, it didn't last, but it didn't last because it had lack of government support. And there could have been such a different ending to this story.
That story was amazing because Maxine Waters is in all these, because she has been working so much, and she was going there and talking to the different gangs and so on. And what I learned from this one, first of all, the fact that the police themselves, once the two gangs had done the twos, they didn't really want that because that was less money coming in for them. There was corruption going on. So they beat up some gang members and then left them out in the other territory.
Yeah, I mean, the the efforts to destabilize the progress the gangs were making themselves to stop the violence is really, it's both shocking and unsurprising. And so the idea that, this was again like the members of the community saying, we want to fix this, we want to make this better. So episode 2 is really important to understand what we don't often see of the legal system. Episode 3 is one of my favorites, the Million Man March. The story of how this march came together was really, really remarkable. And it wasn't clear that it was actually ever going to happen, but it does. And it only happens because so many people came together and said, we may not all agree with Minister Farrakhan, his anti-Semitic statements, some statements about women, but we agree with the cause. And so men from all over the country came and were able to get together. So episode 4 is another favorite about environmental justice and how people realized their communities were being polluted, and they kind of came together to resist that pollution. One of my favorite quotes in that episode is like, why was this one neighborhood that happened to be a Black neighborhood? It was always the place to put the pollutants.
It was the best place, they said.
It was always the best place. Why was Institute? It was always the best place. Turns out, it's a community of color. Episode 5 is really interesting and really, really timely. I mean, they're all
amazing
topics, but episode 5 deals with the efforts to resist affirmative action, but also resist, community schools, pushing back against school boards. There was a really fantastic, kind of situation in the Carolinas where the schools were integrated and all the students were doing better. And then you have some school boards who resist that integration and kind of turn back the clock, but not before a group of pastors and PTA members, multiracial coalition says, we don't want this. We want our schools to be integrated and equal. And that story is being played out, so acutely right now.
And there, William Barber II, I love him. He is amazing. He always tells what he thinks, and there he came up very dominantly in that moment there. And I love that you underlined all that. And also, this is about a very important decision of the Supreme Court, Brown versus the Board of Education, which has been the base for 50 years, and then all of a sudden now.
Yeah. I mean, that's what is so disheartening. So many of these rights were so hard fought, and so many people worked for equality. And to see the pushback is, really distressing. But those people, they push back in such a beautiful, community-minded way. And I think if there's one theme throughout the whole series, it's that these communities coming together in order to make, their places of work and school and play safer and more healthy, more equitable, they really did make a difference. So we end with young people protesting and how effective they were, how motivated they were, and how they realized that their voices were so important. And so I think that was a good place for the series to conclude, this installment to conclude.
Yes.
Because we see that people can always raise their voices, and these young people, it was great at our screening, our first screening in New York City, and we had a number of those young people come and join us, and they led us in a chant, and there was just such this feeling of, we who believe in freedom cannot rest, and that's the title for the whole series.
Yes.
And we chose that intentionally, which is civil rights are never going to end. Working for civil rights is going to be the lifelong challenge for every person. And so, I hope people take from it that there is something they can do, that they are not powerless against even really tough odds.
And this episode, it starts with Obama, the elections of Obama. And I loved how you started the first image and the last image. The first image you had Jesse Jackson, who was so emotional and crying because Obama had been elected. The last image was this little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old, marching and saying, "No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace."
You're never too young to start.
So beautiful. And the whole episode gives you hope because you see these young people. First of all, you explain very well how all the different students and young people movement started, little groups by themselves, and then they all got together. So this is an amazing thing you did, because it was difficult to keep track of all this, and you did it so beautifully. You gave it's like a puzzle. You put all the pieces together, and you give a
all
beautiful.
credit to that we had incredible directors.
Yes.
And so they not only worked on each of their own episodes, but they worked with each other. And so even the process of making the series was a community process. Very, very beautiful, uplifting, enriching process. And I'm so grateful to all of them and to the producers who gave their time and energy. And people are responding. So it's doing very well on HBO. We got a great write-up and reviews. So I hope people, the stories can be tough, but I think it's really heartwarming to see, people standing up for themselves. And that's what we tried to do in the series.
This is an incredible testimony. It's a historical testimony, and people will go and see your documentaries and understand what went on. One moment, just to tell me, please, the name of the 6 different directors, please, so I don't tell them the wrong way.
Yes. So we have let's see who directed. Episode 1 is
Gandbir. First one.
Episode 2 is Samantha Knowles.
Yes.
Episode 3 is Muta Ali Mohammed. He prefers to be called Muta Ali. Episode 4 is Rudy Valdez. Episode 5 is Smriti Mundra. And episode 6 is Asako Gladsko.
Compliments to all of them. They are amazing. Thank you to you for doing this. And are we going to have a next one installment starting 2000?
We will leave it to the
next
next
be
one
very
to do
interesting.
the next installment. Unfortunately, we're still living through it. So
we hope we can tell a right story.
Yeah, we can hope we can write a better history. So
this is terrible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything you are doing. I would like to see you again. So whenever you do something else, something that you think is important, here in New York and in Harlem, because Harlem is important for you, right? Please let me know, because I would like to come.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing our stories. Appreciate it.
You're absolutely welcome. And thank you to my viewers. See you next Saturday, 12:30, Spectrum 1993. Bye-bye. Bye.
Take
Thank you
care.
so much.